So, are those Iron Hands still scary despite the nerfs? My opinion is yes, and let's try and make a list to justify that. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're looking at another competitive Space Marine list. I thought I'd turn my attention back to actual Iron Hands, now they've had those changes made to them with the FAQ, have a play with the units, and see what I would build as a rough draft for an Iron Hand army. In this video we'll take a quick look at that draft, talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses, and how I would run it on the tabletop. Now there's nothing too fancy about this, it's a straight up take a lot of horrendously nasty guns, throw them on the tabletop, and blast your opponent's army into smithereens type list. It's certainly not subtle, but that doesn't mean that it's not pretty strong. So without further ado, let's take a look. So I haven't actually included the detachments on this, but it's organised into a battalion, a spearhead and a flyer wing to maximise out the amount of command points we can get. As it's battle forged, we'll start with 10 and then we'll spend 2 pre-game on additional relics. There are 2 main elements to the list. A backfield castle with a bunch of characters, a Deredeo Dreadnought and 2 repulsors, and 3 Stormhawk interceptors, and then just a few supporting units. Let's talk about the backfield castle first. We've got a Deredeo Dreadnought, which we talked about recently. He's armed with the twin Anvilus autocannons and the heavy bolters, and equipped with the Atomantic Pervice. He's a very scary little unit with a good damage output, and can happily engage virtually any target. The Atomantic Pervice can give a 5+ invul save to any unit that is completely within 6 inches of him. Provided you position them properly, Repulse Executioners can fit within that 6-inch bubble. It might make your moving and positioning a little bit awkward, particularly if there's a lot of terrain on the board, but in plenty of matchups it will definitely be worth sacrificing that mobility and annoyance of positioning units to make sure those repulsors get the most out of their firepower and survive to shoot later into the game. Supporting that little castle, we have a Capstone Bike with the Axe of Medusa and a Stormbolter. I would strongly think about upgrading him to a Chapter Master for an additional 2 command points, which will put us down to 6 at the start of the game. He has the Axe of Medusa as it's a very strong fighty relic, and it only costs a few extra points to put it on him, compared with tooling up with something fancy, such as a Thunderhammer. He'll be giving the Deredeo Dreadnought and the repulsors full rerolls to hit. He puts out a fairly decent amount of bolter fire himself with 8 bolter shots at 24-inch range even when he moves, and he provides a very solid melee threat if an enemy unit gets too close to the castle and begins to threaten it. Also supporting the vehicles we have a Lieutenant with the Ironstone. He'll be providing that very nice reroll ones to wound, and we'll have to think about which vehicle we're going to buff with the Ironstone each turn. If we're concerned about losing the Deredeo, we could put that and the Duty Eternal stratagem on him to make him a real pain to remove. If the enemy targets one of the repulsors and doesn't destroy it, then we'll probably throw the Ironstone buff on that one to make it extra obnoxious to ping off the last few wounds. We also have a Tech Marine nearby, which will help repair any of these vehicles if and when they get injured, and if the enemy spreads their firepower about, we could use that stratagem to allow him to repair multiple vehicles. The Repulsor Executioners don't really have many additional options, but I threw on the extra 2 guns that they can take because they're both very good amount of firepower for just 6 points apiece for the Icarus rocket pod and the Iron Hail Stubber. In terms of the other backfield squads, we've got 2 intercessor squads with Stalker bolt rifles. They're here to chip into additional firepower downrange and also provide some screening or a bit of anti-melee threat if the enemy gets too close. I chose intercessors rather than tactical marines to make most of the enemy's anti-infantry firepower a bit more useless, as the anti-infantry firepower won't be able to target anything efficiently in this entire list aside from the scouts. I chose scouts over intercessors in the last slot, just literally in case we need to screen out enemy units coming in turn 1 against the main castle, and being able to plop a unit down in the midfield either to screen out deep strikers or enemy units advancing up the board is very powerful. I fully expect them to die. If they don't need to screen anything out, then they'll probably just hide on an objective somewhere on the board, potentially in the midfield with their deployment. We also have a very small unit of company veterans, just 2 of them in fact, with a Stormbolter and Storm Shield. Their main purpose is to be an elite slot to unlock us to be able to take the relic Deredeo Dreadnought, but point for point they're really quite decent firepower. When they stay put, they'll be putting another 8 bolter shots down the range, and they won't be the easiest to remove either with those Storm Shields. They'll either camp on an objective or hang around near the characters where they could potentially tank high damage hits for them if they need to. Finally, loitering out of line of sight somewhere in the backfield will be a Thunderfire cannon, allowing us to flexibly take out a bunch of enemy infantry units that aren't in line of sight, add some generic anti-infantry firepower to where it's needed most, or to potentially employ tremor shells to slow down a big unit of infantry. I'd try and keep this well screened. If we do lose the Thunderfire cannon, then the accompanying Tech Marine can go and join the castle and hopefully repair some vehicles or get into close combat. And finally, we have the Flyers. We've gone for 3 Stormhawk Interceptors with Las Talon and Heavy Bolters and Twin Assault Cannons. Each one of these murder machines costs 190 points, so they aren't cheap at all, but they do put out a horrendous amount of firepower, and there are very few targets in the game that they won't be a threat to. As they're Iron Hands, they'll be hitting with 3s rerolling 1s for all of those heavy weapons, even against ground targets, and against flying targets, they'll be hitting on 2s rerolling 1s, so will be ruthlessly accurate. These guys will either deploy at the far back of the board, or potentially try and squeeze into the Deredeo's invul bubble, depending on how much room there is. I suspect we wouldn't be able to fit them all and the repulsors somehow. We'd particularly want to use these to eliminate any enemy units carrying out of line of sight. We'd have the potential to do a flyby and try and snipe characters by landing close to them and unloading a whole load of heavy bolters or something into them. And those Las Talons can add to the weight of anti-armor firepower that we have between that, the repulsor and the Deredeo. Now these aren't the toughest plane in the world, so there's a good chance they'd be taken out early, but at least that will provide a very decent distraction from shooting at the very scary repulsors and the Deredeo that will be chipping away at the enemy army all game. They're extra tough against anything with a fly keyword, as their Halo launcher will give them a -1 to hit when enemy flyers target them, which is a very nice bonus. Just between those 3 planes alone, we have a whopping 54 strength 5 or 6 AP -2 shots, hitting on 3s rerolling 1 in the first turn. That's going to put a big dent in literally whatever we target it at, and that's not even including the Las Talons. So overall, this is a very scary Iron Hands list, with a lot of big threats that the opponent will want to deal with as soon as possible. Its strengths are that it has an incredibly strong damage output, it's pretty reasonable at shooting either infantry or vehicles, and it has good ability to hit things out of line of sight between the Flyers and the Thunderfire cannon. As for weaknesses, it isn't all that tough despite being Iron Hands. We've only got 6 vehicles on the field, and all of those are quite expensive vehicles, with a very high points cost to the amount of wounds on the table. So if you get alpha struck, then you could lose some key units turn 1, which isn't ideal. We're also a little bit light on objective securing bodies, and we don't have amazing mobility to try and score objectives in the midfield, and pretty much none to score objectives in the opponent's backfield. We'd very much have to focus on wiping out the enemy units and denying them any possibility to score points. And perhaps if the game's going very well, then we could advance our castle into the midfield and secure objectives with characters or repulsors in the later game. I feel that with the access to the Iron Hand stratagems, we do have the option for quite a lot of powerful counterplays, such as boosting overwatch, denying psychic powers, or just boosting damage output with that stratagem, No Mercy. We don't have loads and loads of stratagems left though, and particularly if we choose to upgrade the captain to a chapter master, so we'd have to be very, very sparing with the command points and only use them when there's an absolutely amazing bonus that we can get from them. With the very strong Iron Hand stratagems, that can happen fairly often. In terms of tough matchups, I think Imperial Knights, say for example 3 Tyrannus Crusaders, might be tough to chew through with this list, particularly anything tough with invul saves might overwhelm our anti-tank firepower, and the Knights would also have decent close combat. Imperial Fists might be a very tough matchup as well, as they're so strong against vehicles. Having an additional point of damage against every vehicle that you've got is pretty horrendous, never mind if they're using that Siegebreaker cohort for all the mortal wounds in the world as well. Overall though, I think that this would be a strong list to play at a competitive event, and I've already heard of lists that are similar doing quite well in events around the world. I've only just realised that I've managed to forget talking about the Tempered Helm, which people told me about last time. That was the 3rd relic that I was talking about buying in, and I put it on the Tech Marine. Sorry, I forgot to talk about that till the end. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you've got any comments or criticism, please let me know. I'm sure this is by no means perfect, and there are definite optimizations that you could probably make. Feel free to subscribe for Auspex Tactics for other similar content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.